Okay, welcome everyone. So I'm Peter DeCampo. I'm one of the co-founders of the Everyday Projects. Super excited to have everyone here. So welcome.
Hi everyone, I'm Polly Oringo. I'm the founder of Black Women Photographers. Also excited to have you all here today. I see folks have already started dropping in their name and a location in the chat. Amazing, feel free to do so. We love to see where people are tuning in. And this is the first session of the Essentials. This is our first joint collaboration with the Everyday Projects. It's a month-long series that is free, where you'll learn the ins and outs of photojournalism. But if you are, tuning in and you're not a photojournalist, don't worry. The things you're learning can be tailored to whatever your niche is. So very excited to be doing this with you all. And I see Nikki Wu is in the attendees. On the 19th, she'll be one of our speakers, and she'll be reviewing portfolios. And so if you want your portfolio critiqued, if you want that chance to have your portfolio reviewed by Nikki Wu, you can send in your portfolio to us. And that is pretty much where we'll begin.
Cool, yeah, and I'll drop an email address into the chat where people can send their portfolio. So one big thing, so these are free classes, but when you go to a museum, there's like the guy at the door that's like, suggested donation, $5. I am that guy at the door right now. Please drop $5. It's all of the donations are going to Black women photographers to help them continue their mission. You can go to their website and donate. You can Venmo them, you can use Cash App. So all of you, a lot of you have been following Black women photographers and seeing the amazing work that Polly is doing to build this community, and please help her do that. Any donation helps, even $5. So we appreciate that. One more quick thing is that just yesterday, 2 days ago, the Everyday Project announced a grant program for photographers. The deadline to apply is June 7th. You can find it on our website. We're giving out 2 grants for photographers to complete a project that they're working on, $6,000 each. And the grantees also receive mentorship from photo editors, Mallory Benedict at National Geographic and Jahan Jalani at The Guardian. So really cool opportunity there. Real quick, I just want to thank our supporters of this project, our partners on this project. We're able to do the Essentials from a community grant from the Lenfest Institute and the Facebook Journalism Project. So big thanks to them. And I also wanted to just give a shout out to the partners who make all of the Everyday Projects work possible, Code for Africa, Photo Wings, and Open Society Foundation's Culture and Art program. So thanks very much to them. And now I'm going to stop screen sharing and introduce Kiana. Oh my God, so many chats to catch up on. Thank you all for dropping your locations in there. It's great to see everyone. So keep using the chat. You can use the Q&A function. Polly and I will be monitoring that and finding all your questions, and we'll put them to Kiana at the end of the webinar, but please feel free to drop them in there now or at any time. So let me introduce Kiana, who is an old friend of mine and who was in the room when we really formed the Everyday Projects. So excited to be working on this with her. So Kiana Hayeri is an Iranian-Canadian photographer based in Kabul. She's a senior TED fellow and a regular contributor to the New York Times. In 2020, she received the Tim Hetherington Visionary Award and was named as the 6th recipient of the James Foley Award for conflict reporting. In 2021, so just a few weeks ago, Kiana received the Robert Capa Gold Medal for her photographic series, Where Prison is Kind of a Freedom, documenting the lives of Afghan women in Herat Prison. So I am going to let Kiana take it away. Thank you guys so much. Now I have to figure out how to make us disappear. There we go.
Hi, everyone. Okay, perfect. Very excited to be doing this. My first time. I do apologize. We're in Kabul with power cuts, internet. Please bear with me. We'll come back online. So I'm going to actually try something very new. Somebody Another photographer that I really admire once did this exercise with me, and I loved it. And we actually looked at the contact sheet of her as she was shooting, and I learned so much out of how she navigates space, how everybody takes shitty photographs. So there's going to be a couple of things I'm going to go over, and then I will leave some of the stuff if people want to ask questions, because they're much more specific. So in terms of like building narrative, the way I look at a photo essay is really like a book or a movie, right? What does a book have? A book has an introduction, you know where you are, usually has action, so some events are taking place. A book always have characters, there's always a climax, and then there's a closing, right? And how you interpret that varies, and we're going to look at a couple of stories that I've worked on, and I will show you how I brainstorm some of the context that I have. When I'm building a story, I look at a couple of things. Who is my audience? Who am I targeting? Like who am I targeting with this story, right? And it varies. If I'm trying to tell a story out of Afghanistan for Afghans, I tell it differently when I'm doing it for an international audience, right? Obviously, their point of view is different. I use a lot of symbolism so that it helps when you look at history, when you look at art, things that are known to people. And as you're navigating a space, you will see this, like, oh, he's holding his hands like this, or this is very much similar to painting of someone famous, right? So this is something that I keep in mind. We talked about the perspective, and I'm a big fan of solution journalism, where, I mean, these days we are bombarded so often by stories that are grim, that are dark, that are sad, that we get exhausted. We get emotionally exhausted from hearing about all this, but it's always that like little, like a spark of hope that you put into your story. It's a game changer. It's you're showing a problem, but you're also showing a little bit of solution. They have overcome this problem, or what, just something very small. So, okay, what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna start sharing. Bear with me. First, I'm doing the sharing screen, and we do the desktop. Can you guys see my desktop? I think so. Whoop. Okay, so I'm going to walk you. I have a bunch of contacts, depending on our time. I'm going to walk you through a bunch of them. But the very first one I'm going to show you, it's a story we did almost about a year ago, 13 months ago, that we worked on for the New York Times magazine. And we were covering the pandemic arriving in Afghanistan, right? And this is, I want you to keep in mind, a lot has changed since then. This is 10 days, 8 days from the moment the world went into like a global pandemic. The lot to figure out this, moving really fast. So what I did is I was looking at what happened was there was a mass, a reverse migration from Iran with illegal Afghan migrants coming back to Afghanistan, and really where like Corona arrived in Afghanistan. So what I did is, I even have a journalist assigned to me. I quickly booked a ticket, arrived at the border in Afghanistan, and we're going to look at how I navigate this, right? And I'll be very quick because it's a lot of us. At the border, we can literally arrive at the border, follow these migrants, going the process. In my head, I'm thinking about what.
Uh-oh. Looks like Kiana disappeared. Let's see if we can get her connection back. So sorry about that. Please bear with us 1 second. Oh, Kiana's back. Okay.
I am back. I'm sorry. Probably this is going to happen again. I'll do. Okay, so share screen. back to this. So I'm not sure where I got caught up, so I'm just going to backtrack a little bit. So I try to like look for elements that talk about Corona. So it's masks. I also want to remind people this is a war-torn country. So in Afghanistan, there are a lot of guns, there are a lot of men in uniform. So as I'm navigating the space, like lines, and then I started meeting families who were coming back, and their stories started capturing me. So this is one family that I met, and they really got my attention. Eventually, I ended up following them home, which we will come back to. So at this point, I don't know what the story is. The story is moving really fast, so I document anything that I see. People crossing, people lining up. There is no social distancing. And this is the family that I went home with because it was very interesting. They had been living in Iran for 7 years. The kids were born in Iran and raised, and now they were forced to come back because of the corona, right? So I go with them, and you get to see a lot of bad photos, by the way. So I'm photographing anything I see, masks, gloves, then more fever. These things now we're used to seeing it after 13 months, but at the time, this is how doctors, and then it starts getting really chaotic at the border. People get frustrated. They've been held up for several hours. So I'm trying to capture that chaos, moving on. And then a riot breaks out. So that I'm going to move fast. Then you start seeing introduced temperature. And then I went to the IOM center where the family went to, and I was surprised how much access I was given, considering that this is Afghanistan. So I spent the evening with them, the next morning. And meanwhile, so this is a family that have just arrived in Afghanistan after a long journey. So they're exhausted, looking for friends. That shows isolation, that shows exhaustion, that shows that despair. As I'm navigating story again, I'm looking at other cases. I'm hoping that I can find several cases that I can go home with one of them. At this point, I don't know who will allow me to go. Or the other problem we have in Afghanistan, a lot of districts are not accessible because of the war. So I have to try get as many as I can. So eventually one of them will work out, right? And this time I end up being the one that I chased, and I go home. So bus terminal. And a few days later, we went back to their house. So I just spent a day with them, trying to photograph. I was surprised, again, please put it into the context that at the time we're all like really afraid of what's happening. You're supposed to be social distancing. And then these guys received dozens of people from Kabul who have come to visit them because they were away for many, and there were a lot of hugging and kissing. I'm going to move fast. So I spent the day with them at home. And then the father was very sick, so we suspected that he may have corona. We went to, and then we made a second visit to their house as they're settling in. This is a family that have been away for 7 years, so they're unpacking their stuff that have been kept in storage room. And even though I knew it was not going to be used in the story, but why not? Let's see what they have from the past and what their previous life tells us about them. And then we ended up going back to Herat at this point with the journalist that I was working with, Mujib, amazing collaborator. And I'm going to talk about this collaborating with the journalist. So with Mujib, we went to the Corona hospital, and they had turned it into a prison. Basically, they had brought in a group of like military, ANSF, to guard the prison, and how people were, this is at the time Afghanistan is trying to get ready for the arrival of the corona. So there were beds being moved to the hospital. And again, I'm talking about the finding elements. So I knew the story is something about war and the corona, right? So I constantly had to think about how am I going to put these two elements together? I need uniform, guns, and I need people who are sick or wearing masks. So always looking for those elements as I'm navigating the space. Then obviously sanitation. And then signs on the street about Corona. We went to a lab, of course. Kind of funny looking at this 13 months later, to be honest. I went to the hospital. People are stranded days after days. They come. There's no, at the time, there was no Corona testing available. And we were talking about introduction, right? Somehow we need to let people know that we're in Afghanistan. One of the signifiers always women in burqa. So always look for that. And then inside the prison, I do actually have a funny story because at this point I'm wearing goggles and my goggles were so, had like steam in it that I couldn't see. So I'm blindly shooting all these photos. I don't even see what's happening. And this photo, which turned out to be a very iconic photo of almost made it to the cover. I just turned around, saw a beautiful light, couldn't see anything else, snapped one frame and walked away, and turned out to be lack of infrastructure, or this is the ICU at the hospital, and then again mask. And then I started like getting playful about the mask because all the masks are blue, green, shades of that. So like I started imagining these as like patterns, right, that get repeated. Then this part we can ignore. Then ambulances. Then we went to an IDP camp, which was related to the story because these IDP camps have members of Taliban and the hospital, the COVID hospital. So we're trying to like emphasize on there's a war going in Afghanistan and Corona is arriving in Afghanistan. So we went to the IDP camp that usually have Taliban. There was an attack on the hospital from the same. Then science, sanitation. Then we went to the new hospital, which is empty and nothing is happening. We knew, I was told that this story was going to be a cover story, so they wanted me to shoot some horizontal, vertical, yeah, some vertical frames, and have that in mind that eventually the logo and everything is going to land. So I started to photograph these people, collecting their stories. We're gonna move. Then we went to the Corona Center. You try at this point, the story is moving fast. You capture as much as I can, right? Like anything you give me, I'm gonna photograph it. I don't have time to do much thinking prior to shooting, which we'll come back to it because there's some other projects that you have time to. Then we went back to these guys. For these like elements of, if you guys look, there's like masks, gloves, and at the same time you see the gun, you see so all these like little elements. Looking for those masks again, and then I was trying like some like portraiture just to see what the story is going to be. And we heard just before leaving, I heard there has been, at the time, there was a lack of masks and gowns in Afghanistan. And we learned that a new factory has opened up in Herat and they're doing this, just made a visit. And just the governor, one of the characters that was important to our story. So we went, made a visit, and photographed him. So that's how we did it. And then I'm going to show you how the layout can come together. So eventually they ended up using a photograph because the story really became about the border, and it became about this reverse migration into the country. So we looked at the border, and this was the photo that ended up on the cover. And this is how they put it there. One of the things I really liked about this story was at the time when I was working with Mujib, he's a great collaborator. Especially when we have time over like a long form story like this, I read her text every night, I read his text every night. He looked at my photos. At the time when I first arrived at the border with this scene, he wasn't there. He hadn't been assigned. So what he did, he looked at all of my photos and basically wrote the text based on the visuals that he got from the videos and the photos that I got. I also like read in stories like elements that he was pointing out to. So I would go back, and next time when I'm shooting, I would think about, okay, how am I going to include this? How am I going to portray this? And it's a great way of working, collaborating. I was going to talk about how I like the intimacy that I achieve, I guess, when I'm shooting within a space. And for that, I have a different story to show. So this was one of the most difficult, like emotionally most difficult stories that I photographed. I'm showing you guys everything. I'm not doing a select because I want you to see how, what I shoot, what I file, and eventually you can always like look online, see they run 1 or 2 photos. This is an assignment that was breaking news. There was an attack on MSF hospital, a maternity hospital, which was very brutal. And I was called, I believe the night before I was called on assignment, and the corona assignment that you guys saw, we spent, I actually took note of it, 12 days photographing that, right? Whereas with this story, I only had 3 hours. Like I left in the morning. So I know this story is about a hospital has been attacked. People have died. We're late. The attack is already done. It was the day before. So how are we going to show this story? So immediately we went to several cemeteries and just asking around, do you know if anyone has been brought? We were kind of lucky. We found, we were a little bit late because the ceremony was over, the funeral. We managed to like reach there and photograph the grave. Very quick. One thing that Afghanistan has taught me, definitely 2 things actually. One, being patient, because there are days that you wait for access, you wait in a room. Afghans love to sit, so you wait for a long time. And be quick, because you show up to a place, security changes, you might have like 2-3 frames and you have to get out. So I've become a much faster shooter now. So we got here, we asked people where these people live, we show up there, and the reason I'm using this story as an example, because it's about, this is a family that is mourning the loss of their daughter, as well as the child that she was bearing. She was shot on the labor bed as she was going through labor, giving birth. She was shot 3 times in the stomach, and both her and her unborn child were killed. So a lot of this is about respecting the family, giving them space, not pushing too far. Different photographers have different way of approaching this. In these situations, I'm a very slow shooter. And the reason I say this, we're going to actually look at a sequence of footage, and we'll look at timing. You see how like I click 1 frame, I might take 3 minutes to shoot the second one, because you never want to overwhelm them. A lot of this is, and this is during the corona, right? This is like in May, 2 months to the pandemic. I'm wearing masks at some point, you know. I know it's probably my editor would have not approved it, but I actually removed my mask because I have a mourning family and I'm covering half of my face. I'm trying to connect with them without talking too much. So a lot of it is like shaking your hand, how you hold your body, moving very slowly, acknowledging their pain. Never, I mean, my opinion, never be shy to ask for access. Like most of the time.
Don't worry, y'all, she'll be right back. The connection is kind of shaky on her end, but keep the questions coming. We're going to leave a lot of time for Q&A at the end, so you can just drop your question in the Q&A box. And I'm seeing a lot of great questions coming in, so if you should see a Q&A box where you can drop in your question.
Yeah, the questions are really great. Sorry, this is, I guess, the nature of, oh, okay, I don't have to fill time. She's appearing, but there we go.
I am back. I'm sorry, guys. There's not a lot I can do about this. Okay, there we go. Back to here. Okay, so where were we? Yeah, we were talking about getting. Okay, so we arrive in front of the house. We see a lot of men quietly. I approached the family. I showed my respect, condolence. I think it's a lot of it's about the body language, right? Quietly introduced myself and what I'm trying to do, where the photos will appear. May I photograph or not? They said yes. So I'm slowly photographing the line of men saying hello to the family. And then I was going to say, never be shy asking for access. So it's photographing women. It's very difficult in Afghanistan, but you learn, like, you always ask politely, you explain. A lot of time you just like back and forth, try to reason with them, because they would say, no, you can't photograph it. You explain why, please tell me. And then you try to convince them. So I got access to the women's side. And this is the part, we're going to look at the photos and then we're going to come back at the sequence. But this is, that's her mother, her aunt, her younger sister on the side. And then I learned she had a daughter, so I tried to find the daughter. I heard that the daughter doesn't even know what's happening. So I wanted to illustrate how innocent she is, how clueless she is. She was playing in front of her house without even knowing what had happened the day before. And then we went back to the hospital, even though I knew they were not going to let us in, but I thought maybe I'll find like signs or some things that are like bullet holes here, for example, or people trying to get news from their family and loved ones. And then here I learned there had been, can't remember the exact number, some 20 infants that they can't figure out who the parents is. Either the mother has been killed or they've been separated, and they all have been moved to a different hospital. So we immediately hopped in the car, and these are all happening very quickly. Maybe within the first hour, we're already here. Went to the hospital, concerned families here. We eventually slowly made our way in to photograph the babies that survived and parents picking them up. And this is the spark of hope that I'm saying. This is a very grim story, right? But in middle of this grim story, looking for that like a bit of hope always changes things. This is a father who was separated from his child. The mother survived magically. That's the mother. She magically survived the attack, and that's it. Some of the things that I do, maybe not in this setting, because this is the breaking news. This is a very fast-moving story. But when I have time, I do a lot of like things that breaks the ice, right? Icebreakers, and it depends. I look at the setting. I look at the people that I deal with. I make a lot of jokes to make people laugh. That usually open them up, make them. And I've noticed the jokes that I make, because most of my career, I've been in Afghanistan. And then recently in the fall, I was in Canada working on different stories, and the jokes that I was making, it really wasn't working. And I realized how cultural that is, right? So I make jokes. I do, when appropriate, I do a lot of body contact. Here, for example, at the morning, I removed my mask. I got close to the mother, held her hand, talked to her as I was holding her hand. Eye contact is very important for me, so I always try to keep that. I smile a lot. With the mask has been a little bit difficult, but now I do like this like eye gesture, like trying to like smile with my eyes. I nod. And then in situations, especially in Afghanistan, dealing with women or people who are concerned about their security, their safety, I always try to, I think the best way of putting this is, you always want to minimize the gap between you and your subjects, right? So there are different ways of doing this. In Afghanistan, I try to like explain, listen, I'm Iranian, I understand the culture, I use the language skills that I have, I'm a woman myself. One thing that I always, when I'm shooting, I keep in mind, especially dealing with grim situations, graphic imagery, is I always think, do I want to be photographed that way? If not, I'm not going to photograph someone else like that, right? If I don't, that's an important rule I think we all have to do, to have respect and dignity for our subjects. I always acknowledge their presence. Rarely I like pull up my camera and shoot. And even if I do, I usually try to approach my subjects afterwards and say, hey, listen, I took this photo. I hope you're okay. My name is Kiana. I always introduce myself. I ask a lot of questions, especially in slow shoots. There are times that I spend an entire day in a house, and there's a lot of times asking questions. And for me, it's it's difficult to take photos while having very deep conversations. So it's a lot of basic questions. How many kids do you have? What do you eat at home? How was your day? It works in Afghanistan, not necessarily in Canada, but so I keep them talking and I listen as I'm photographing, and that usually brings them. And another way of doing this is like I always look for common things that I have with a family. If they're cooking, if there's a food that I've had, or if the mother is cooking, I would talk about a dish that my mom used to make and how it would make me feel at home. Or one line that I always use in Afghanistan, there are many Afghans who have migrated to Iran or have lived in Iran for some time during the civil war or during Taliban ruling. So I always joke with them. I say, oh, now it's my turn to become a migrant, to immigrate to your country. And that usually they're like, oh yeah, no, we understand, because it's a in Farsi they say dard mushtarak. It's like a common pain. No, pain is not. Pain is a little too strong. Or I talk about my upbringing, or in the West, it's very normal to have a job from a very young age. So when I'm working with kids who are working, I always say, oh yeah, I was 16 when I had my first job. I was working at a bakery. I always try to humanize a story, meaning that in this place that I'm working, there are a lot of numbers, like this many people died, this many people have been wounded, and it's easy to look at the numbers and just get away from it, right? But when you put a face to that number, it changes it. People recognize that individual and their pain, and they connect to it, and they get captured. I was going to show another, okay, so we're going to look at the sequence. I'm so sorry, I forgot about this. So what I will do is, so this is the start of the sequence here. By the way, I intentionally underexpose my photos when I have a window so I can draw out enough information and don't blow up so don't be too crazy that the photos are dark. It's actually intentional. I'm trying to. Okay, so we're gonna look at the timing here. So 11:39 is first frame. About a minute later, about 3 minutes later of the same setting, and we're looking at the raw contact sheet. So this is exactly how my framing went. So I'm not shooting like 1 minute, 3 minutes. Maybe a few back to back. And usually these few back to back happens when it's like when there's motion, right? Somebody arrived, I can't remember who the person was, but like maybe a sister or somebody arrived in the room, and then 45. Minute later, 47. So and then here like 49, and then I remember here at this point I approached the mother and I had a chat with them, and I said, I'm really sorry about your loss. And then the next one is about, how many photos is that? This whole sequence of 37 photos happens from 11:39 to 58, about 20 minutes, if I'm right. Yes, about 20 minutes. So I take my time in this situation. There are times that I have to move fast. You don't have time. You go boom, 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 take the photos, and you move on. We were talking about breaking down the story, right? And how I look at the story as something that has like a opening, a climax. I also do one thing, and that is I create what I call emotion list. And I'm going to show it to you. I did it 2018. I got a grant to work on a story about mental health in Afghanistan. So before going into the shoot, I drew this charts, and I had to pull it out of my notes actually today, so mental health, what does it come with? And I created like a topics of like, mental health is related to depression, PTSD, like abandonment, suicide. It's a taboo here in Afghanistan. There's therapy, medication. It's related to domestic violence, abuse. So I created all of those. And then I did this like emotion list, right? It's like, okay, when you're depressed, how do you feel? You feel sad, you feel lonely. If you're dealing with domestic violence, there is anger, there is, and then other feelings like numbness. So I made this list, and in my head, I started imagining how do these look like, right? How do you show loneliness? How do you show isolation or numbness, right? And as I was navigating the story, as I was like going from home to home, meeting with subjects who are suffering from PTSD, I would imagine that feeling in the room, right? And because here in Afghanistan, I think it's one thing, because I have to work quick, I enter a room, I quickly look at the best light, and I just try to stay focused on that. And then I would imagine, how does loneliness look like in this light? So this is in the back of your mind, right? And the moment this thing happens, you capture it, right? Somebody just sits there with like a body language that will tell you about having anxiety or something, you capture that. Sometimes I do these, my brain is a funny one. I always make fun of my own brain. I'm working on very complicated stories, right? And in my head, it makes sense. Outside of my head, it doesn't. I create these mind maps. Whoever came up with mind map was a genius. They taught us in high school. So I put out the theme, and I start drawing out locations, why the locations matter, themes. I'm putting it down, and as I'm looking at this, I see how some of the things that I never thought they were going to be connected, they connect to one another, right? Like, and I start like drawing these like crazy lines, connecting different themes. That's what. How are we doing on the time? Good. I'm almost done. I was going to so about pitching stories. I'm going to bring out two of my pitches, and I'm being super vulnerable. I'm going to show you what I've showed. One is the grants, the proposal that I wrote for this story for Stern magazine, and I'll show you how I break it down. And then another one, it's a story. Okay, let me pull that one up first. 1 second. Finder, draft proposal. Okay, guys, this is very personal. So the way I write, to me, the way it makes sense to write a proposal is that I want to. These are people who are sitting far, 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 far away from the place that I'm trying to do this story, right? So I love to start with a paragraph that is very descriptive, right? So what did I do? Sorry, there we go. Okay. So I came up with this idea about mental health in Afghanistan when I was working on a different story, right? So I drew in scenes out of that story just to transform the people who are reading my proposal, right? Like I literally describe in a small room as Baziak Khan neighborhood, and I talk about the woman who I was talking to and how she was talking about having this pain in her head, etc., etc. So I do like the one description, then I explain how I came to meet this woman, right? I was working on a different story, and how over the years I saw this pattern to be repeated, right? Like, then I a lot of the stories that I do, it's me. I don't know how other people function, but hopefully, hang on, my internet is it's working now. So for a second, I thought I got cut off. A lot of the stories that I do, it's very personal to me. It comes from a personal curiosity, and yes, I grew up in a family that PTSD because my parents were part of the generation who went through the 80s in Iran. So I talk about my personal connection to this story and why it matters to me, right? And then I go back again to give some description to keep the attention of the person. Then I go about talk about why the story matters, why giving me the grants is important, why I'm the best candidate to do this story. Then talk about some facts, some numbers, convincing. Then I get into the logistic of it. It's like, if I'm given this grant, this is how much time I need. This is how I would be shooting it. And then I both with my photographs and my text, I always love to either give a shock to the person as I'm leaving it or leave them in a suspense, right? So I describe another scene that I had experienced, and then I just ended with, this is a nation traumatized by war. So this is one example. This is a story that I came to as I was doing other stories. So I was present, right? So I had a lot of details to give. I'm going to bring another pitch that it's about a story that I heard about it, but it was in such a remote region that my only way of doing this was getting there, right? And I'm going to leave it here. But what I did is I called many people. I got as many details as I could. And this is an editor that I regularly work with. So I don't need to show my work because we work together. He's seen my work. It's just knowing how much knowledge I have about this story, right? So I get as specific as possible. These are the villages that I'm talking about, right? This is how I'm going to get there. And I talk about the details of it. This is how the family, it's about these communities in Daikundi that they self-isolated at the beginning of the pandemic, which is very rare in Afghanistan, right? So this is how this is how they do it, like specific about how the process is done, how people pitch in money or wheat or other things to hire people to guard their village, make sure. And then I talk about the logistics, like in terms of logistics, this is how we're going to get there. This is the security protocol we have. This is how long it's going to take, how many days I need. And then I leave it to that. On the next workshop, they will I'm actually two more workshops. They will talk more about how to pitch. And I would love to hear how editors receive the pitch, but I always try to keep at least the body of the email very short. Because I personally get a lot of emails during the day, and if an email is long, I stop reading it. I move on to the next. So I keep it short, and then I always attach like a PDF with like more details if they want to know. And I always leave it the option is like, if you're interested, I'm happy to offer you more. At this point, I'm gonna wrap this up, Peter.
Great. That was really wonderful. Thank you so much. And a lot of great questions have come in. So let me take a look.
Sure. And meanwhile, I'm going to say something. I didn't talk much about, like, I didn't want to talk about like the logistics of working in a difficult, like a country like Afghanistan, because it's much more specific. But if people have questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Yeah, and some of those were the questions. Let's see. Let me just, for the sake of time, let me just start grabbing some. Okay, here's a really good one. So you mentioned your sort of shared cultural background as you're photographing in Afghanistan, and you're coming from Iran. What tips do you have, though, for building this same kind of rapport and relationship with your subject when you don't share the same cultural background or the same language?
I look for things that I can share with, right? I mean, Afghanistan, I happen to be Iranian, but let's say I go to, I don't know, give me a situation. I can't think of something.
You speak Spanish?
But
I don't, you know, like.
Okay. No, I don't speak Spanish, but I go to like, let's say Brazil, right? And then as I meet a community that somehow relates to something that I know, another community. So I connect those dots, right? Doesn't always have to be the culture that I have. It could be about life experiences. And us as photographers, we go through a lot of different experiences. So just draw in. You have to be quick into drawing those things.
They don't speak Spanish in Brazil, but I'll let that slide.
Portuguese, no, I know, but I was like quickly.
Okay, a lot of questions about your career. So how, for example, how has your personal work led to paid work?
I did start with personal work. I was in last year of university, and my thesis project turned out to be interesting. I got a grant. I built upon that. Then I went back to my home country, to Iran, for the first time, and I started kind of expanding that work more and more. And then people got to know me by my work from Iran, and then eventually I arrived in Afghanistan, took that work in Iran to Afghanistan and did it there, and then just it expanded from that. I think one tip that I can give to like younger photographers is like, even if you have to work at a bar or restaurant at the start of your career, invest into some projects that matter to you most, even in your own backyard. You don't have to go far, and get yourself known by that.
A lot of people asked about, well, let's talk a little bit about like building the narrative. I mean, of course, you touched on this as you were going, but let's dig into that a little bit more as far as, are you reviewing the photos every night? Do you go into it sort of thinking, I know the narrative of this story, or are you trying to, refine it as you go, or does it really emerge later in the editing process?
I think all of the above. I never go into a story saying that I know this story, because I've been surprised over and over and over again. So that's for sure. It depends how much time I have shooting, how much time I have editing. Sometimes I'm shooting so much that as I'm going through this, I don't have time to look back at what I have, which is a pity. In ideal situation, you want to take time in between your shoots and deciding how the story goes. But unfortunately, that's sometimes a luxury. Sometimes when I say overshooting, I don't mean shooting too many frames, but sometimes I overshoot different situations. I will go to 5 schools, and I will go to like 2 different events of the same type, right? And I just shoot. You always can edit down. And then in terms of like the narrative, a lot of this come in the editing process, right? Once, I think it was Chris Anderson who told us, when you doubt, check it out. It doesn't hurt to photograph it. Later, you can always drop it out of the story.
And how do you sort of balance the different elements, time-wise, when you're in, I hate this phrase, in the field, but when you're out there, when you're photographing, when you're reporting on a story, you have a limited time and you're trying to figure out the elements of the story as you go. So how do you sort of balance, like, are there moments that you've woken up and been like, you know what, I actually need to photograph something today that is completely different than what I thought yesterday, because I've just kept reevaluating what the story is? Yeah.
All the time. Sometimes it takes time to kick in, to something click. Is like, oh, I need this element, right? And then when you're out in the field, to me, a good photograph is made when there's good light and when there is good composition and some emotion to it, right? So I try to capture as much as I can, and then later decide how these elements play in the story, right? And one other thing I have in mind is, like, when I was younger, I was always shooting in the same distance. If you look at all of my photos, they were like repetitive, right? Over time with practice, is like in my head is like, I need close up, I need medium, I need wide, I need close up, I need medium, I need wide.
And do you do that because you feel like that's what each story demands, or that's what an editor wants and you're trying to please them, or?
Yeah. Not edited. When you're editing, I think it's nice when you're putting a series of photos in linear. I think it's nice to be able to move spaces, even if you're looking at a film. When they're doing one sequence is like zoom, medium, wide. So you don't want to be always with the same distance. So I think about it that way.
Great. Polly, definitely, if there are some of the questions that are catching your eye, feel free to jump in. Several people have asked about logistics, and especially about permission. And I think that applies both to permission on a sort of official level. You know, people were asking about a lot of the photos you showed were hospitals, infants, babies that you were photographing. But then also, I think on a personal level, you know, you're getting access to be in with families during really difficult times. You know, what does that process look like for you? I mean, did you get sort of authority permission for the hospitals or prisons, for example?
And so I think that's on the official sites, every country, every region, every town has a different rule, right? And it only comes with time. And if you're hopping into a country to do a report, that's why you work with a fixer, because they know better how to get access to certain things, right? In Afghanistan, I can tell you, I mean, it's different, but it's on so many levels. It's much easier. You call up people. People here are so much used to having journalists covering. So you just show up, they understand what your work is, right? Whereas, for example, in a place like Germany, I could not function because I didn't understand how things work. Who should I go to first? And they're very bureaucratic. So that's comes with time, and I can explain how it works in Afghanistan, but this doesn't necessarily apply to every country. In terms of personal and families, I think that is common with different families around the world. You always want to be very honest, very straightforward, why you're doing this, where the photos are showing. And I think if a photographer is sincere and genuine about what they're doing and why they're doing this, you can communicate that with the family, and that's how the trust comes. That's how access comes. But I think it's really in here.
And I guess along those lines, you know, for you getting access to these really difficult moments, since you've been so raw and open with us so far, can you talk a little bit about yourself and self-care and how does this, you know, how do you work through these very difficult situations? How do they affect you, and how do you take care of yourself? Do you take care of yourself?
You're asking me at a time that I'm actually going through a very dark time with everything going on in Afghanistan. So I'm not sure if I'm doing this right. I'm going to be very honest and vulnerable. I'm like steps away from burning out emotionally and physically. How do I take care of myself? I do my therapy. I've been doing this for 7 years. Every week, sun or rain, sunshine or rain, whatever it's called. I take my therapy, even if I have to wake up at 2 a.m. and do it. So that's, I take that seriously. I've learned with time to be vulnerable with friends that I trust and talk about my emotions with other photographers and journalists. And it helps to see and hear other people are going through the same thing. I also developed these like little patterns that make me feel at home. I'm constantly on the road. For the past 8 days, I've been traveling on the road. And what do you do when you go from one hotel to another? I take the same soap everywhere I go. Or I've learned like little things that make me happy, right? Like I love, don't judge me, these like mindless coloring. I just love them, right? Just put me a lot of ease. Those things, what else do I do? Guess that's about it. But I have to do much better. I am not necessarily the best person to ask.
Well, thank you for being open about that, and I think it's so important because you're not alone in these things. None of us are, and I think that often we don't talk about these kinds of things, and when we do, we realize, oh, other photographers are going through some of the same things. And can I ask a little bit more? When you say wake up for your therapy or make sure, do you mean like actually seeing a therapist, or?
So my therapist is not in Afghanistan. Even prior to a pandemic, we were doing videos. And now with pandemic, she sees all of her clients through videos. Sure. So it's actually much easier now. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you for that. Yeah, I think that's super important. And how about in the moment when these difficult things are happening? You know, is it hard for you to work through that, you know, when you're there and it's happening?
I think I've learned to that camera between my eyes and my subject. Okay. It usually hit me really hard when I come home. The only situation that I find difficult is when children are at pain. It's when I have a hard time functioning during the shoot. But usually when I come home, and I'm gonna actually share this with people, whoever do like, who was this? Bruce Shapiro from Dart Center. He taught us two techniques that I really liked. One, when I'm going, he says, he learned it from another journalist, going out into like a difficult story. He imagined wearing a raincoat, like a bright yellow raincoat, every time he goes out in the field, like cover himself. And then as throughout the day, he takes a moment to like feel and imagine that raincoat on his skin. And then when he comes home, he takes that off at the door and he comes into the space. That doesn't stop you from feeling what you have to feel, but that helps you to compartmentalize or like separate emotions and spaces. So that was really helpful. Another one was, for me, many times I get hit really hard when I'm editing photos, when I'm looking at the photos that I took, dead bodies, things that are really graphic, right? And those moments, another person taught me to like close my eyes and imagine whatever a safe environment looks like to me. For me, it's always like being hugged, right? So I close my eyes, I imagine being hugged by someone that I trust, and then I open my eyes, and in that safe space, I try to get through the editing. And that has been very helpful as well.
Wow, it's interesting, the sort of visualization techniques. I think that's great. Thank you. Yeah, and people are thanking you in the chat for being so open and honest. Yeah, appreciate that.
Thank you.
Yeah, Polly, are you there? There's so many questions that have come in that I'm like, where do we go next? But Polly, if anything's catching your eye, go for it.
No, great stuff. And I want to thank you as well, Kiana, for your vulnerability, because again, we don't talk about this enough. And it just so happens to be Mental Health Awareness Month as well. So if anyone is needing access, I'll drop two current fundraisers that I've seen for journalists for therapy relief funds. And I'll drop them in the chat in a second. Let's go to a lighter question.
Not a bad idea.
People have been asking you about your gear. Do you have a go-to when you're in the field? I know you hate that phrase, Peter. Do you have a go-to when you're on assignment? What's in your camera bag?
I honestly, okay, so Afghanistan is like, packing for Afghanistan is a different story, trust me on that one. In terms of gear, honestly, like use whatever you're comfortable with. It doesn't really matter. I use a Nikon D850 with a 24-70 lens, which I recently, last week, I smashed. And that is my main camera. I carry a lot of batteries and cards. So that's like the gear that I carry. I have backup stuff. In terms of what I carry in my bag, okay, in Afghanistan, what do I carry? I have my headphones. I have wet wipes because you're in Afghanistan. I have, what else do I have? Medications. I have a little pharmacy. I have, unfortunately, it's a country that we deal with a lot of blasts. So I have a sometimes first aid kit. Other times I always carry my tourniquet with me. What else do I carry in my bag? My notebook, a pen, a reliable pen, which is important. So that's in my immediate bag. And then as I'm traveling in provinces, what do I take? I take things that make me feel at home. So I use the same soap everywhere I go, right? Like same products, like hygiene products. I carry a lot of snacks, not only for myself, but I also carry snacks for my drivers, my fixers, 5 other people. Like I make sure everyone is well fed, water. What else? I have a little, I don't have it with me. I have a little roller that is like a mix of essential oils, and especially when I have to wear a burqa, like a chadari, I use it just to like feel good. That's it. Hand sanitizer, it's a recent addition. Soap, masks, I guess that's it.
Thank you. Some practical things and also good things to keep in mind for safety. There are a few questions relating to safety. As a woman, how do you keep safe when you are traveling to different areas, especially areas that like you said, could have conflict? Do you have any tips or things that you've done? Because some people are asking if you travel alone or do you have a team? What is it like for you?
That is something I think people have to like look at their own environment because it's different. Like I don't know, maybe a neighborhood in Brooklyn will be dangerous as well. But in Afghanistan, things that are, I think the highest risk right now is like robbery and crime. So I make sure I don't wear anything expensive, or I carry my camera most of the time in my bag. I rarely have it on my shoulder. I don't flash my those things. Harassment is there, unfortunately. If you come to places like Afghanistan, it's great to do a HEFAT training. In HEFAT training, they teach you about crowd control. So you never want to be like stuck in a crowd that things can quickly change. So you take care of that. A lot of time I have a mail company just like, because I'm photographing. Once I was assaulted while I was photographing from behind. So at times when I don't feel safe, I take a driver or someone, a fixer with me to watch my back. Those things I do. Then you learn about, like, for example, we were in this very, very small town in the north that I just came back today. In that town, I learned as a woman, you can walk in the evening and it's safe. Nothing will happen. But you don't leave the city because then you can get kidnapped, you can get shot by Taliban, all those things happen. Here in Kabul, you do not walk, as a woman, you do not walk. In my neighborhood, you don't walk after sunset, but you can go to west end of the city and walk. So it's all, I think you just have to learn about the environment and do like a risk assessment. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's perfect. There's another question here that's interesting from Mary. She asked, what impact do you believe you have made in your photography in constructing peace? Seeing as you come from a background with the conflict-prone areas / covering conflict-affected areas.
Repeat that one more time, Polly. Like, how do I promote peace?
Do you feel it's asking what impact do you believe your photography has made in constructing peace? Like, I guess I mean you can interpret that in different ways, but yeah.
I mean, honestly, like in Afghanistan, the bigger piece is not related to my photography and reportage. Like it's the problem is much more complicated. However, I've seen the impact of my my work in small ways on individuals. Right, we did a story about this university exam preparation course recently, got a lot of attention. Then we did a GoFundMe, raised enough money to send 300 students on scholarships to that course, right? Or there was I did the story in prison, then I did a follow-up on the woman, we did a GoFundMe. On top of that, the woman that I followed up got a book deal with Audible that changed her life entirely. It's all like on like small level. Larger level, honestly, this is like the biggest gift as a journalist you can receive, is like you do a story and things change on the ground. And we did a story about kidney. I pulled it up, the contact sheets. We just didn't have time to go through it. We did a story about kidney, a booming business around selling kidneys, and we were the first one who did it with New York Times. And national media in Afghanistan picked it up. It went viral. Everyone started reporting, and they actually stopped it. They prosecuted people who were involved in this. They shut down the hospital that was doing this. Biggest gift. Peace, not necessarily, but some things have changed.
Awesome, thank you. Someone asked, can you talk about financial viability and sustainability of doing this type of work in a country like Afghanistan compared to the West?
For myself or for my subjects?
I think for yourself.
For myself. That's a tough one. I do have to acknowledge that I'm lucky, that I'm doing okay work-wise, but I also consciously I've made the decision to stay in Afghanistan, live here, because I'm the only pretty much I'm the only female photographer who speaks the language, right? So it puts me in a very unique position where I can use that and do my work. So on that front, but prior to that, I guess you live a I mean, I still live the same life. I don't spend a lot of money. I don't know how to answer that question. I do know that, I mean, the industry is a tough one and it's very difficult, but I think it's okay if someone they can balance their work with photojournalism and something else on the side to be able to make it sustainable. That's doable. But I've been lucky enough to be getting enough work to sustain myself here in Afghanistan.
Thank you. And there's going to be a class on finances and being your own manager. I think it's the last class actually. So do register for that, for tips on finances, because I know it is an important subject and one we hate to talk about, but we have to remember the business side of things and money.
And the week before that, Danielle is doing a class on fundraising and how to find support for your projects too. So basically come to all the classes is what we're trying to
say. Another interesting question from DB Numa. Do you take photographs every day? Does that help you hone in on your abilities to build narratives?
I do take photos all the time. I think it's like exercising, and I see myself. I take a few weeks off. I go away, and I come back. Even during those times, I try to always like observe and photograph, even with my phone, because it's a practice. Yeah, but yes, always.
Amazing. And Saba asks, what is your ultimate goal in photography? And related, have you always wanted to be a photographer / photojournalist?
I feel like I repeated this story so many times. So how I became a photojournalist, when I moved to Canada as a teenager, I didn't speak any English. So I picked up all the art classes and English, and I love photography because I didn't have to speak, which was great. So I was doing well, I was making friends, my teachers loved me. So it became like my way of connecting with my new environment. That being said, my teacher took me, he showed me extra stuff, and he showed me the work of a young photojournalist at the time, Dominic Nar, who's now a dear friend of mine. And it really shook my teenage world. And I was at that time, this is grade 11, I said, this is what I want to do. So from 16, I always wanted to do this. Ultimate goal, I think photography is an environment, and I always loved, and I feel like one time I heard from an actor or an actress that it's the best job in the world because you live 1,000 different lives, right? I think photography for me also through experiencing these lives with my subjects and entering their homes. That camera is the perfect excuse to walk into somebody's house and experience life with them that you would have not been able to. So that's my ultimate goal.
Thank you so much. We'll take one last question because we want to be mindful of time. This one is from Dominique. When building a narrative, should we keep it a secret until publishing, or could we decide to publish ourselves on social media to share, even not being paid for it, but maybe known or even help people?
I think that's a golden question about, it's a golden question. Different, so working on assignment, it's a different publication have different policies. New York Times, very strict about not talking about what you're doing until the story is out. Nat Geo, they ask you to post as you're going through it. So that's on assignment. On personal level, if you're working on a story that is
No. Did we lose her for the last question?
I think so.
Well, as we wrap up here, maybe we'll get her back to just be able to. Mm.
I like hear you coming in
I
and
know.
out. Was there?
Oh, she dropped.
So I finally dropped those links of therapy relief aids that I've seen in the chat. One is from the IWMF, and the other one is with the AAJA Association, which is Association for Asian American Journalists, that you can check out. Another for Black journalists in the chat. And Peter has dropped the link to register for the rest of the webinars. If you want to pull up that screen again, we can do that. Just to remind everyone that this is a month-long series and every class kind of builds on itself. And so it really is important to do to register for the rest of the classes.
And also, so you guys should see my screen again. Also a reminder that it is very important to send your $5 to Black women photographers, please. Polly needs to stay caffeinated and that $5 will get her there. So there's that. But yeah, please register for the rest of the classes. And this has just been so great. There's our info and Kiana's info, so you can follow her. Wait, is Kiana's info there? No, Kiana's info is there. So you can follow her. This has been a really great start to this series. So thank you, Kiana. And thanks everyone for your great questions. Kiana, are you back with us?
I am back.
Okay.
Yes, I am. I'm sorry.
We missed most of the answer to that question, unfortunately.
Okay, I will keep it very, very short. So if you're doing a story on something very hard to access or that nobody has access, it's very secretive, a community or something, don't publish anything until you're done. If you're doing something along a general theme of something that builds your brand, then post away. If it's like young people somewhere and it's do it. However, the more you post, if you want to sell a story after you finish shooting it, less publications are willing to take it if you've been publishing it on social media, just so you know, right? So either you're doing the project because you want to build your brand, then go ahead and post it on social media. Otherwise, don't. Do like 1 or 2 snippets just to show like what you're working on, but that's about it. At this point, unless I'm asked to share on social media while I'm shooting it, I don't. I keep it secret until it's done.
Great answer. Yes, I definitely echo that. To be on the safe side, do not share, because a lot of editors will not publish if it is shared on social media. So thank you so much, Kiana, again, for your openness. I think you've covered so much in an hour, a little over an hour. So thank you so much. A lot of great things being shared about this in this chat. Everyone, this was recorded, so you'll get a copy of this. If you have friends who missed it, let them know that this was recorded. And you'll also get a survey after this to give any feedback on this class in particular. And also a reminder to sign up for the rest of the classes. And as Austin said in the chat, please do apply for their grants. They have 2 6K grants, and that's 6,000 USD available for photographers and photojournalists to do apply. And then also the deadline for our friends at Women Photograph Grants is coming up in, I think, 10 days. So also apply for Women Photographs Grants. And if there's nothing else, Kiana, do you have any last words for us?
No, not really. I think it's just important to be vulnerable, and we talk about, yeah, I think that's important in our field. I know there are a lot of competition, but it's important to have each other's back and at times be vulnerable.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kiana. And thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you, guys.
See everyone next week.